Hey everyone. So today I'm just going to really quickly show you how to use cut and sew padding in the Romy bra. So in a previous video, I walked you through how to pad a jasmine bra with cut and sew padding or cut and sew foam. The Romy bra is a little bit different, but the general idea is basically the same. So I'm going to go through this really quickly. So here I've cut out, this is just the front of the Romy. So there's the upper cup. I've used some stretch lace. The lower front cup, which I've done in my mesh lining, my exterior fabric, and my foam. And the side front cup, which again, same thing, mesh lining, my exterior fabric, and my foam. So we're going to start with the front, and basically we just need to assemble the top and the bottom. So I'm going to start with my exterior fabric layered over top of my foam. And then I'm going to take my upper cup and just place that like that along that upper edge, and then take a piece of my lining and sandwich that upper cup between my lining and exterior layer and foam. So the assembly is basically the same as in the instructions. The only difference is we're adding this layer of foam behind our exterior layer. So I'm going to use a straight stitch and a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You can pin this together beforehand, but I'm just going to show you really quickly. If you're looking for information on how to cut the cut and sew foam, just check out my Jasmine video. It's got all that information at the beginning. So here we go. You'll notice if you try to flip this back, our seam is super bulky because of the foam. So what we're going to do is just take a pair of sharp scissors and trim back the foam as close to your seam allowance as you possibly can without cutting into any other layers. So there you can see there's my stitching line, and I've just cut it as close as I can. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to separate our foam layer. We're going to just with our fingers turn the seam allowance towards the foam, and I'm going to use a zigzag stitch to just kind of stitch over our join. So basically we're using the zigzag stitch to flatten our seam, kind of like an understitch, really. You just want to catch that little bit of foam seam allowance that was left, because this is going to flatten it, create a nice flat join, and help the lining roll towards the back. So this stitching will not be visible on either the outside or the inside. This is going to be between our layers. There. So once you've done that, just trim back your seam allowance. Just trimming as close as you can without cutting any of your actual fabric. And then when you lay your lining down and your exterior fabric down, you've got a nice crisp finish and no seams exposed on either side. So that's how we assemble the front with the lining, or with the padding. And now at this point, we can take our side front exterior fabric here, or self, and just lay that together. Then on top of that, we take our foam and then flip the whole thing over. And we're going to take a piece of the side front lining and just sandwich our center front piece between the side front lining and the side front exterior and foam. So it really is just like the instructions. It's just the only difference is we're adding this foam. So switching back to a straight stitch, and we're stitching through all of these layers So I just kind of go through and make sure they're all lining up as I'm stitching it. But if this is your first time sewing this, I definitely would recommend pinning it. The only kind of caveat is that it can be difficult to pin through all these layers. So just periodically check and make sure everything's lining up. So there's our finished seam. So now we're going to trim back our foam seam allowance as close to the stitching line as possible. So both pieces of foam need to be trimmed back. This first one is really easy, but our center front piece of foam, it's a little trickier because it's gotten stitched in and everything. So just fold back your fabric the best you can and just do the best you can. It's going to get stitched over anyways, so. Yeah, over here where it's joined, I just cut that right off. You can see I'm very precise. So just like before, taking just our side front foam and pressing the seam allowance with your finger back on top of the foam. I'm going to use a zigzag stitch. And basically you want your needle just to catch your foam seam allowance, that little bit of foam seam allowance that's left. And this is going to flatten our seam. You do not want to have a big bulky seam right down the middle of your boob. It's not a good look. Okay, so there it is. Trim back all of your excess fabric. And then you can fold your lining over and turn it to the right side. And there it is. So the construction is generally the same. The only difference is that we're adding the padding layer against the wrong side of our exterior fabric. And then we're just zigzag stitching to kind of understitch the seam allowance in place and to prevent any bulk. So the only other step that's a little bit different is adding our band. So here's my band, my back band. I'm just going to stitch that along here, going through all of the layers. So in the instructions, I show you how to do an encased seam here. Here we're just going to do a regular seam. And I'm going to trim back my foam, and then I'm just going to serge this seam allowance. If you don't have a serger, you can just zigzag stitch it, or you can just leave it. It's a knit fabric, so it's not really going to unravel at all. So I'm just trimming this back. And I'm going to serge this. And that's basically it. The rest of the construction is basically the same. So you would then attach your bra together down the center front. If you watch my Jasmine video, I've got some tips on how to create a nice center front seam. And then you would just add your fold over elastic and band elastic and finish it off like you would the Romy bra in the instructions. So I hope you found that helpful, and thanks for watching. Bye.